Welcome to the deep dive. We live in a world just brimming with information, different ideas, different viewpoints. And our mission today is to take one specific piece of writing. It's a blog post by someone called SpiritWhisper titled The Destructive Influence of Liberal Ideology, and really just explore the arguments and claims it presents. We're diving deep into this author's perspective. We'll meticulously look at what they're actually saying and, the examples they use to back it up. Our goal, like always, is to impartially convey the ideas in the source material. We're not here to endorse it, okay? But to help you, our listener, understand this particular argument thoroughly.
Exactly. And what's quite fascinating here is how a specific ideology is framed, how it's presented as this foundational societal force in this text. We'll unpack the specific points SpiritWhisper raises, so you can really grasp the nuances of this critique, because understanding different viewpoints, even ones that might feel challenging or frankly quite different from our own beliefs, that's key to being truly well-informed. So sometimes you have to roll up your sleeves and explore arguments that maybe diverge quite a bit from conventional wisdom. We'll look at what the author says and maybe touch on some broader context too.
Right. And SpiritWhisper doesn't really hold back, do they? They start strong. The author immediately sets this really firm tone about the perceived path of liberal thought. They open by saying liberalism, which they claim began as a supposed movement for freedom and equality, has apparently morphed into something much darker and more harmful over time. And the result? Society's fractured and families weakened. It's quite a starting premise. Suggests to read a fundamental shift.
It is. And, to really get SpiritWhisper's critique, it's probably helpful to remember that liberalism itself is, it's a broad term. It's evolved over time. It can mean anything from classical economic liberalism, free markets, individual liberty, to modern social liberalism, which tends to emphasize civil rights, social justice, maybe government intervention for collective welfare. But SpiritWhisper, in this piece, they seem to be targeting what they see as the contemporary versions of this ideology. The author is really setting up this fundamental tension, right, between individual pursuits and collective stability. Their central claim, as they detail it, is that this contemporary liberalism pushes for individualism at the expense of collective well-being. And they explain this by arguing it encourages self-fulfillment and personal truths, but without much thought for community or family. The author then spells out the consequences as they see them. They claim it leads to a society where, quote, commitments are disregarded, where loyalty is an afterthought, and where self-interest reigns supreme. So SpiritWhisper concludes this path leads to broken families, communities struggling with isolation, and a sense of purpose that feels increasingly hollow. They're suggesting that, maybe the initial idea of liberalism was freedom, but its modern form, in their view anyway, has kind of ironically led to a different sort of social problem.
Okay, so SpiritWhisper is tracing this line from maybe collective good towards what they view as this radical individualism. So how does the author argue this actually plays out, in what many see as society's core unit, the family?
Yeah, that's a really critical point for SpiritWhisper. A big chunk of the post is on what they call the breakdown of family values. Quote, they assert that liberals argue traditional family structures are outdated, that they promote this idea that, quote, family can be whatever you want it to be. SpiritWhisper claims this just disregards the established roles and bonds they believe are needed for a stable society. Now, it's probably worth noting, right, the definition and structure of family have changed a lot through history, across different cultures, lots of reasons, social, economic, cultural shifts. But SpiritWhisper attributes these specific changes directly to liberal ideology. That's the core of their argument here. The author gives examples from the source, things like higher rates of divorce, children growing up without the guidance of both parents, and a general lack of stability within the family unit. They also mention observing a steep decline in marriage rates and an increase in single-parent households in places where they say liberal ideas have taken hold. These are presented as symptoms, basically.
Right. And SpiritWhisper isn't just noticing these trends. They're explicitly linking them to this ideological shift they're talking about. The author even points to research they claim gets ignored often. Research suggesting, that kids in stable two-parent homes tend to do better academically, are less likely to be poor, have stronger self-worth, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And SpiritWhisper builds on that. They conclude these trends are, quote, not coincidences, but actually symptoms of a system that discourages commitment and promotes a me-first attitude. And furthermore, the author claims liberals actively ignore these findings, that they push for policies that, again in the author's view, dismantle the traditional family structure and undermine parental authority. So it's presented as this deliberate rejection of what they see as proven societal benefits, all driven by this individualistic mindset. This perspective views family not just as a personal thing, but as a fundamental block of society. And if it weakens, there are knock-on negative effects. Of course, many social scientists would point to a more complex mix of things: economic pressures, changing gender roles, more personal autonomy influencing family structures. But SpiritWhisper's argument is pretty distinctive. It draws a direct causal line straight back to liberal ideology.
Okay, so building from the family unit, SpiritWhisper then sort of widens the lens, right? They extend this critique of individualism to the whole community, arguing that this ideology wears away at our social connections. How do they illustrate that point?
Well, SpiritWhisper lays out the argument that liberals advocate for policies that prioritize individual rights over community cohesion, which, the author claims, results in a society where people are just increasingly disconnected from one another. Simple as that. The post details this assertion that traditional communities are eroded by a liberal agenda. An agenda, they say, discourages shared values, common goals, communal support systems, and instead it promotes this every man for himself mentality. The author suggests this leaves people feeling isolated, struggling to find real connection. And what's interesting here is that SpiritWhisper doesn't just talk in abstracts. They give some concrete examples of how they think these policies show up.
Yeah, I saw that. They give some specific examples relating to liberal urban policies.
Exactly. SpiritWhisper critiques policies that they say prioritize economic development over community needs. This, they argue, leads to things like gentrification, displacing longtime residents and breaking up established communities. The author mentions the argument that public spaces that once served as gathering places are replaced with high-end retail and luxury apartments, places people used to connect. SpiritWhisper claims these changes, which are often justified under the guise of progress, actually strip away the soul of communities, leaving them, quote, unrecognizable and devoid of the warmth and solidarity that once defined them. It's important to understand the nuance, maybe. Urban development, gentrification, these are really complex issues. They're often driven by market forces, population changes, city planning choices. Different urban theories suggest various ways to balance economic growth and social equity, right? But SpiritWhisper frames these specific outcomes as direct results, symptoms even, of a liberal agenda that, in their view, just doesn't value community and tradition enough.
Okay, so it's one thing to talk about institutions like family, community. But SpiritWhisper goes further. They argue this influence actually seeps into our daily lives, specifically through education and popular culture. How does the author claim liberalism has sort of taken root in those areas?
Right. So SpiritWhisper addresses this assertion that liberals have, quote, long targeted the education system as a means to further their agenda. They claim that by promoting relativism and personal truths, liberals have shifted education away from what they see as essential, a foundation of facts, discipline, and responsibility. Just to clarify, relativism here in this context usually means the idea that truth and morality aren't absolute. They're relative to maybe individuals or cultures. So the author expresses concern that students are encouraged to sort of find themselves rather than, say, learn concrete skills and values to contribute positively, leading, SpiritWhisper says, to a generation of young people who are ill-equipped to handle the realities of life and who might have a sense of entitlement. They argue further that if young people aren't taught resilience, accountability, they become adults who lack the skills to navigate challenges. This really touches on a long-running debate in education, doesn't it? The balance between student-centered learning versus curriculum-driven teaching, and the role of schools is it imparting moral values or fostering critical, independent thought. SpiritWhisper clearly comes down on the side emphasizing discipline, facts, responsibility as the foundation.
And it's not just the formal classroom setting, right? The author also talks about this pervasive influence in popular culture.
Yes, exactly. SpiritWhisper details the claim that liberalism has infiltrated popular culture, that it promotes media that celebrates individual desires over social responsibilities. The author mentions the argument that, movies, music, and television shows constantly push the message that personal happiness is the ultimate goal, regardless of the cost to others. They conclude that this relentless focus on self-fulfillment has eroded the values of sacrifice, duty, and respect for others, values they see as essential for a functioning society. So this perspective suggests cultural narratives aren't just mirrors of society, they actively shape it. And that contemporary pop culture, influenced by what they call liberal ideology, is actually wearing away at these communal values. It's a critique that sees films, music, TV as embodying and pushing a specific worldview with real-world consequences.
Okay, so SpiritWhisper is moving from these, let's say, theoretical claims and institutional impacts to what they perceive as actual, tangible, negative results, outcomes attributed to liberal policies in the real world. What does the author point to as specific policy failures?
Well, SpiritWhisper discusses their claims about liberal economic policies. They argue these policies have led to the decline of the middle class and increased income inequality. They give a specific example from the source: liberal-backed free trade agreements. These, they allege, caused the outsourcing of jobs, which devastated local workers and communities. Now, it's worth remembering, free trade agreements are complex. There are often economic arguments for them: comparative advantage, efficiency, lower prices for consumers, that kind of thing. But they also often draw criticism, right, for their impact on domestic jobs and income distribution. SpiritWhisper clearly aligns with that critical view, suggesting that while proponents might talk about broader benefits, the actual outcome of these policies, in their assessment, harms the working and middle class. The author kind of implies that while liberals might say they fight for the working class, their policies often end up benefiting the wealthy and powerful, making economic gaps wider.
And the author also addresses crime and punishment, right, as another area of significant impact. And again, tying it directly back to this liberal ideology.
Yes, they do. SpiritWhisper explains their argument that liberal policies on crime and punishment have resulted in cities where lawlessness prevails. They cite advocacy for leniency and opposing strong law enforcement as the cause. And the author notes the stated consequence: rising crime rates, with ordinary citizens living in fear and communities left vulnerable to violence and exploitation. Now, this perspective often aligns with what you might call tough-on-crime approaches to justice, prioritizing punishment, strong policing. It contrasts with other views in criminology, doesn't it? Views that might emphasize addressing root causes like poverty, lack of opportunity, systemic issues, or views that advocate for rehabilitation over pure punishment. But SpiritWhisper frames increases in crime as a direct result of policies they label liberal, implying basically a failure to maintain social order because of too much focus on individual rights, maybe, or not enough punitive action.
Okay, let's unpack this final thought then from the author SpiritWhisper. They conclude with this really strong call for a return to what they call core values, values that they say have sustained societies for generations. The author emphasizes family, community responsibility, and respect for tradition. And their assertion is that liberalism, with its, quote, emphasis on self-centered goals, has basically shown itself to be an ideology that ultimately leads to societal decay. SpiritWhisper ends the post saying that rejecting what they term the empty promises of liberalism is necessary to rebuild a society that values responsibility, commitment, and, quote, true progress for all.
It's quite a narrative they build, isn't it? What's noteworthy is how clear it is. An ideology, starting with a promise of freedom, has, in their specific view, gone wrong. It's strayed into excessive individualism, leading to tangible breakdown across family, community, education, culture, the economy. And their solution is straightforward: go back to these foundational traditional values. This really invites a deeper thought, maybe for you, the listener. Based on the arguments we've just laid out from this text, how might different worldviews fundamentally define concepts like freedom or equality or progress? And maybe more importantly, what are the implied costs or benefits of each definition, depending on the ideological framework you're looking through? It's something to ponder.
Absolutely. It definitely gives you a lot to think about. Thank you for engaging in this deep dive with us today, really meticulously exploring SpiritWhisper's specific arguments and claims. We hope this comprehensive look at their perspective, alongside some of the broader context we've tried to bring in, helps you become even more well-informed as you navigate the very complex landscape of contemporary ideas.